our discussion of this mimer talking about the 11th day of Nisan with the prince for the tribe of Asher, Pagiel, the son of Achran, who brought his korban, he brought his offering, his gift to the Mishkan for the dedication of the Mishkan, and the Medrash goes into what it stood for. It stood for God choosing the Jewish people, for the Jewish people choosing God. To explain all of this, the Rebbe then goes into a verse from Eicha Chelki Hashem Amra Nafshi, that my soul is basically a part of Hashem, so says my soul. And we brought the mashal, the analogy. But you know what? I think on this very discourse that you should have, we have we have summaries. So we may as well do the summary the way that it's stated right here. Okay. Let us find the right page. Okay, so we are on page 191, so we have a summary here at the bottom of page 191, or page 17 in the document. So on the verse, God is my portion, says my soul, the Medrash offers an analogy. A king entered a country accompanied by dukes, prefects, commanders, and one person said, I'll choose the duke, another, I'll choose the prefect, another, the commander. One clever person said, I'll choose the king. The question of the Rebbe is, of course, right, the rest of them can be replaced, the king cannot be replaced. So basically, what was the cleverness? What cleverness does it take to choose the king? I mean, of course, not just because he can't be replaced, but the king is in charge of everyone, right? So, I mean, that doesn't seem to take a lot of cleverness. What is it about? So, what does this mean? That there are Gentile nations who serve the sun and who serve the moon. Israel, by contrast, only serves the Holy One, blessed be He. And this is the intent of the verse. This is the intent of the verse. God is my portion, says my soul. So we basically choose Hashem. So now, here are the questions that Rebbe, now we're going to state the questions that Rebbe has. Why do we need to be clever to choose the king? The rationale given because everyone else could be replaced. Okay, I said those already. I put the cart before the horse. Now we'll continue on. Okay. So now we're going to continue with Ois Gimel, this third section, which is on page 19 in the PDF file. And what we're going to now be going into is a little bit of, it's an interesting thing that Yiddishkeit, Judaism, and Jewish sources share. What was Avodah Zarah all about? What was worshiping idols all about? You know, when we're children or when we're younger, we think, oh, they're bowing down to a statue, to a piece of wood, to a piece of gold, to silver, right? And it's silly. But Judaism explains a lot deeper what this was really about. And the whole philosophy, and the philosophy that honestly, there's a certain sense to what it's all about. And what we'll do is we'll see how Chassidus now, and not just Chassidus, but Jewish writings go into explaining what Avodah Zarah was. What were they thinking, right? It's like, okay, people are bowing down to a statue. What are they thinking, right? So now we're going to get a little bit of in depth. We know the Rambam in the laws of idol worship, he has a whole section talking about how idol worship started. Very interesting piece. But we're going to see what the Rebbe says here. And I think there is a chat. Let's see. Reading behind the lines. Okay. I'm not sure what you're reading behind the lines, Susan. I'm sorry that you can't extend your voice here.
Rabbi, hi. I think what they saw in not a statue is the same thing that we see in money today. Or in what else was there? Money. The idea of chasing a dollar. That takes up all your time. That's up
Well,
a
money, I know that if I have $1 million, I know that I can buy certain things, I can do certain things. It is practically empowering, right? It does give me the ability to do stuff, okay? As opposed to, say, bowing down to a statue. That doesn't seem to empower me with anything. So I understand money, but and that's much more understandable. But of course, their belief was in a power behind the statue. But let's take a look and see how the Rebbe unpacks all of this. Now, on the surface, the above can be explained based on a well-known concept. Now, just by the way, in Jewish discussion, and I guess other discussion, when we say on the surface, that means that we're probably going to end up rejecting this idea. Okay, so we're putting forth an idea that we're going to reject of what they of what the idol worshippers are worshiping when they're worshiping their idols. So on the surface, we can be based on the well-known concept that in the early generations, the people who worshiped the stars and the constellations. So you may or may not be aware, there's a word in Hebrew called Ovdei Kochavim Umazolos. I just want to see how can I hold on a second. I apologize. I should be able to do a screen right. They've changed the mechanisms here, how you do this. Okay, so in the we have you ever heard of the word akum? Akum is used oftentimes in Jewish literature. Akum, and in Hebrew, it's
Avodas Kechavim.
Avodas Kechavim Umazoles. It is the worshiping of the stars and the constellations. What are the constellations? The constellations is the zodiac in the sky. You know, there's all different kinds of creatures and beings and entities in the sky, the zodiac, and you have the stars and you have the zodiac, and the ancients believed that the energy comes into the world through these higher entities, which are the stars and the constellations. Right? They're called what?
So do many modern people.
I haven't met any.
Really? I
Oh, you are?
Rabbi,
absolutely.
what sign were you born under?
How much weight I give it is a different question. But whether or not the Boirei Olam created a universe, and we've seen Shefa coming from different directions during different times. The Torah, no, that Torah doesn't explicitly talk about it. But with Mitzrayim, that they were saying under the star of, this is all very, very true. And I'll sit there and, well, if you want for hours, and I'll explain to you how it all lays out. Now, how much weight you want to put on it is different. I don't feel it affects my life because my life, first of all, is only under the boss. So I'm not sitting there doing it because I'm worried about a terrible thing that happened and give me which unfortunately a lot of people I know do. But I'm just saying, don't knock it. That's all. Sorry. It wasn't junk.
I've dedicated my whole life to knocking it.
But why? You have to respect it and then counter it. Even if not, I mean, you want to make fun of it about the ideas.
I didn't make fun. I said the
No,
ancients had a belief. That's all. And you're telling me
all I'm
that
saying is
modern people do too as well. Okay, good. So let's go back.
no, I'm saying don't think of it as like the ancient people were all fools, or that this was nonsense
I
of
didn't.
some kind.
Your words, not mine.
Absolutely, I'm sorry. So now I'm cleansed. I got it out of me. Gay gesund to hate.
You feel better?
Thank you.
Good.
I apologize and thank you.
I'm saying, in ancient times, this was the prevalent belief. This was what everyone. This was all the rage.
I also keep forgetting that these are not open discussions. That you have a derech to give the Rebbe's vort on it.
We're learning a particular.
I understand. I know that.
In terms of is there any validity to it or not, is the machlokas between the Rambam and most of the other commentators. So it's a big discussion in and of itself, which I was hoping to avoid, which we can avoid, because that's not really the point of, that's not the point of what we're studying today.
Right. Thank you.
It is a debate amongst Chachamim, whether there is a validity or not. And you're right, the Rambam was more of a singular position on that. But let's go back to what the Rebbe is saying. So we know that the people would worship stars. It's very interesting, right? We see many places in the Torah, and we see even that Avram Avinu consulted the stars and had a belief in them, right? And Hashem said you have to go out of your astrology and
what? Where?
It's where was this? So
no, we don't have to do this, but I know this was at the Brisbane Kochavim. Well, maybe not. It may have been at the very first time.
It was right before the Brisbane Abasodim. So
right.
So it says Hotzei.
Go outside and look at the stars.
But it wasn't just go. It wasn't go outside, but it's go. But take yourself outside.
Right.
And Rashi comments there. You have to go out of your astrology, right?
Right.
Because the astrologers are all telling you that Avram cannot have a child. And Hashem says, but they don't know anything about Avraham. We're going to switch your name. So, Isaac, what does that show? That astrology is stupid or astrology works?
It doesn't show either.
In my opinion,
it can go either way.
It actually shows that astrology works because if
that's because it wasn't the same person, right? That's true. Well, you have to go one more step. You have to say then that you can change the astrological effect by changing your name. But you're not changing it because Hashem himself, the boss, gave him the name change. So then he's fine on all sides. That's all. Yeah.
All right, so where were we? I think I lost the spot.
Anytime Hashem wants to change my name, my pleasure. Yaroslavich, for these many years, long enough. Something like cats.
So what I was going to say was that seemingly that story with Abraham shows that astrology works. Otherwise, Hashem wouldn't have to change his name. Right? There would be no need. So there's a little contradictory point. Saying go out of astrology, and all we're going to do is change your name. One second, if I'm going out of astrology, we shouldn't have to change your name. We should just, we're beyond it, right? Ein mazel b'Yisrael, as the verse goes. So my answer to that question is that this was before Avram had the bris milah. And because it was before the bris milah, he was still under the influence of maybe something outside. But afterwards, after the bris milah, then we say ein mazel b'Yisrael. Anyway, but all of that shows is that there is mazel for goyim, right? That there is this other power. And as you're saying, whatever, whether one wants to believe it or not believe it, or this is not the point of our discussion here. One thing we can all agree on, Isaac, I hope, is that we're not to worship it, right? Because that's called avodas kechavim. That's called idol worship. So this was, in the ancient days, this was all the rage. So the early generations, the people who worshiped the stars and the constellations. So they did not think that the stars could generate the blessings independently.
Why do we say Mazel Tov? Oh, sorry.
That's a very good question. Can I give you the short answer? I don't know. You want the long answer? No, I'm kidding. Chassidus explains mazel, the word mazel that we translate as constellation, actually comes from nozel. It's the flow. It's the flow of divine energy from the source. So the constellations receive that flow, and that's why they're called mazalos, constellations, because they are receiving that flow from God, from higher. We are going straight to the source. In other words, these constellations are getting their flow from the same place that we are, but it's the flow from the divine blessing. And that's why we say Mazel Tov, having nothing to do with the constellations, but the source from which the constellations themselves are receiving their flow, their energy. How is that?
If I can remember, it would be great.
Remember what? Okay, moving right along. So here's the thing. The people who worship the stars, they did not think that the stars could generate the blessings independently. They knew that the sustenance conveyed to the stars, conveyed to earth through the stars and the constellations is brought forth by them and is not brought forth by them independently. In other words, even shall we say, at least the scholars, the knowers of idol worship understood that there is a God above all of their gods. There's a God with a higher case G over all of the gods with the lowercase g. And as the Talmud calls it, Elokad the Elokaya, that there's a God above the gods. They all admit this. They all know this. So many have difficulty relating to these concepts because the worship of the stars and the constellations has, thank God, to a large extent, disappeared from contemporary society, except for Isaac. Nevertheless, the concepts are still relevant for, that's okay, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding with you. as will be explained, the intent is not only the actual stars in the constellation, but rather all of the intermediaries through which godly blessings are conveyed to the earth and its inhabitants. The service, at least in a figurative sense, of such intermediaries is unfortunately still widely prevalent in our time. Okay, so let's go forward and understand this. Instead, this is what their belief was. Okay, we just said what their belief was not. Now let's see what their belief was. And I'm gonna, before we go into this belief, I'm gonna ask you a question. Would it make sense for God, who is the creator of space and time and the entire universe? He brought everything into existence, and he is above and beyond any dimension whatsoever. Would it make sense, just in your mind, that this entity would have nothing to do with the running of planet Earth? In other words, he put in systems. We know if you run a business or you run an operation, you want it to be turnkey. You run it so that it can run on itself. So would it make sense that God would, so to speak, delegate the whole operation of planet Earth and anything connected to it with lesser entities? Does that make sense? Would that make sense? In fact, I think it makes more sense in a certain way than what we say. Why would God have to be deciding about, all of the Mishigasin on this planet, about the sun rising and the sunset and the weather and the this and the that? That seems to be
have to be or want to be.
Why would he want to be? Yeah, they're a better word. Why would he want to be, right? Right? It's it would make sense. In other words, what the idol worshippers felt was that God himself is above all of this. Ram al kol goyim Hashem. Hashem is above and removed from all of this, right? And then he delegated the power and the agency to other forces, namely the stars, the constellations, all of these different things that they worship.
The problem is, just very quickly, and then I'm really done with anything, because that'll explain anything else I have to say. We were made B'Tselem Elokim, right? We were made in whatever that means, in the form of God and God's form. But when it comes to us now, the problem is, and I forget who said this, it may have been Rabbi Sachs. The problem is we try to create God in our image, meaning we are attributing constantly our feelings. God would do that. I mean, how about this? God would do that, and I ever did. You're getting back into your shtick, and you're trying. You can't imagine anything different than your stuff. What do you mean God was this? For many, many years, God is kuloi toif. Really, I don't think I've ever complained, about God. He has given me more and far, and all of us, than we deserve. If you accept that, if you live with that, but accepting it is hard because you're constantly about to gerizha, and you have to stop and say, hey, just watch. But that's all it is.
Do you ever study Gemara?
Yes. So I did the Daf Yomi 2 cycles.
2 cycles of Daf Yomi. So
actually 1.5. Because Erevin, when I got caught up in that, I didn't have the head for it. So, and I still go now. I know we're in Sanhedrin. I know. Keep up with it.
So when we study Gemara, there's a kasha. There's a question that the Gemara asks, and then it brings a teretz. It brings an answer. One of the difficulties that people run into when they're learning the question is that they have the answer in their mind. And when they are answering the question, but right now we're just at the question. We're not at the answer of the question. We're at the question. It's important to remove the answer. So, Reb Isaac, I'm gonna suggest that when we're studying, when we're asking a question and then you give an answer, okay, well now the question disappeared. No, we're still on the question because we're trying to bring out a point. So you have to make sure that when we're doing the question, we have to absorb the question.
Absolutely.
That's all.
Absolutely.
Okay. So instead, it is the Holy One, blessed be He, who conveys sustenance through them. We are again, right now, we are studying, we are learning, we are trying to understand the erroneous position of idol worshippers. You understand what we're doing here? What did you learn in Chassidus today? We're trying to understand idol worship. That's what we're doing. Okay? I don't need for anyone to say, oh, that's wrong. Well, we all know it's wrong, right? We know the answer. We know that ultimately we're not going to accept this. But we need to, first, to really appreciate what Yiddishkeit is, we need to understand what is it that the idol worshippers were saying. So instead, it is the Holy One, blessed be He, who conveys sustenance through them. And where these people erred, however, was in thinking that the sustenance which God conveys through the stars and constellations is transmitted by their choice. In other words, that these stars and constellations have what we call today agency. Hence, since according to their misconception, the stars and constellations, and by extension, the entire array of intermediaries in the natural order, have the power of choice, these people felt that the intermediaries deserved to be served. If you assume that they have agency, that they're making the decision, then should you worship them and ask them for help? That would make sense. They didn't know the truth, that the stars and the constellations have no free choice at all. They are all only as an axe in the hands of the chopper. Okay? That, as the Gemara says, Kagarzim biyad ha'chaytzev. They're like an axe in the hand of the chopper. So would you go over to your gardener, you see him down the street, and you go over to the lawnmower would you go over to the lawnmower and say, lawnmower, please, could you please come and mow the grass of my yard? It's getting long. I would appreciate it very much. You'd be a mishuganet to do that, right? But if you thought that the lawnmower was the one making the choice and it just brought along the gardener, as an appendage, well, then you'd ask the mower for help. But that, of course, is crazy. They didn't realize that they had the wrong understanding. They thought that the stars and constellations were the ones who were deciding where the energy would go. They didn't realize they were just a conduit. The conduit does not make a decision. The conduit is not the switch, right? This was the reason that they bowed down to the stars and to the constellations and served them.
The conduit can't do it.
There we have it. The conduit only as it is instructed. How's that? So in Chassidus, it's explained that this error, thinking that the intermediary powers have the choice whether to convey sustenance or not, is not okay. So now we're going to get into, in this paragraph, he gets into a little bit of a discussion, which is not so germane, but let me just explain that, there's two forms of idol worship, two ways of worshiping idols, halachically. One is that you put full power in your deity, and God is out of the picture, okay? The other form is that it's your deity along with God, okay? Like, for instance, Christianity. Christianity would be what's called shituf, where God is in partnership with somebody else, a nice Jewish boy. I don't know how nice he was, but So God is in partnership with somebody else, right? Their deity has formed an LLC with God, okay? So that's called shituf, and according to some authorities, that is permissible for non-Jews. For Jewish people, for sure, it's prohibited. There's an argument amongst the Rishonim, the authorities, whether that's permissible for non-Jews or not. Okay. Now, according to their mistaken conception, sustenance drawn down through the stars and the constellations was dependent on the free choice of the celestial bodies. Hence, the people thought it is appropriate to thank them, following the logic of the saying in the Talmud. The wine belongs to the owner, but the waiter deserves favor. Right? It's a famous saying in the Gemara, Chamra lamara, tevusa l'shakya. I always understood it meaning that you say thank you to the waiter. So the waiter brings you food to your table. Do you say thank you to the waiter? Yes. Was it his food? Was it ever his food? Will it ever be his food? Never. He's just a conduit. Right? But you say thank you because there is some agency, isn't there? Doesn't the waiter have some agency? He could give you good service, he could give you bad service, right? Etc., etc. So maybe there is, right? There is some agency going on over there, but that's what they thought. They thought that, okay, we know that there's a God above the gods and all of the energy is ultimately coming from God, but we're getting it from these entities. And if you go into a restaurant, who are you going to try to make an impression on? The owner of the restaurant or the waiter? Which one is going to make for a better dining experience for you? Possibly, possibly making good friends with the waiter, right? That's going to give you a better dining experience. So we're gonna skip through this other analogy. We'll go to, furthermore, because of their mistaken conception that the stars and constellations have free choice, they thought that by serving them through such service, they could ingratiate themselves with them, and they would motivate them to grant them greater prosperity. Well, I had this experience at a restaurant the other day, where my wife and I, we were very nice to the waiter, and we ended up with a free dessert. Look at that. See, it works. Was the waiter the owner? Did they own the dessert? No, but they were the ones conveying it, right? So you could understand the waiter mentality. Let's see. We have to take a look at what Susan is saying here. Sorry, but this concept does not hold water for me. The stars and constellations are just there and have nothing to do with mankind. Okay. Well, I'm not telling you, Susan, I was not sharing with you a fact. I was sharing with you what their belief was. Okay? So, and that's why we kind of prefaced by saying that this is what all human beings, this is how they understood it. They understood, look, these things are above us. And why did people worship the sun is a little bit more understandable, right? Because the sun, we see we're getting warmth and heat and the plants grow and everything works because we have the sun. Let's worship the sun. But even the moon and even the stars, they saw all of these as being sources of energies coming into the world. And as Isaac says, according to Judaism, you could make a case that that's still happening to some degree. And we have to go straight to the source, which is God. But again, we're not going to go into all of that. But the point is, this was their conception. This was their misconception. And I'm calling it waiter mindset. Why is it waiter mindset? Because when you're in the restaurant, the most important person there is the waiter. What is he? Is he a manager? No. Is he a cook? No. Is he the owner, right? No. He is the one who is providing you with exactly what you have at your table. So let me ingratiate him so that I can have a better living experience. So that's the idol worship is the waiter conception. It's the waiter mindset. And yeah, go ahead.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
in today's society, there's a group of people. I mean, there's a number of countries that do Avodah Zorah. You know, I mean, you have the Kurds. I'm not saying that they're Muslims, but they hold on to a concept called Zoroastrianism, which is a form of worship of the fire. You know, they're not doing it so much now because they were invaded by the Islamic world, but there's also India, for example. They worship elephants. They worship certain animals. You know, they have temples that they build. You know, for that purpose. But I think it all comes from a certain amount of strength, and like you say, for heat, if there was a sun, it would be a matter of getting heat from the sun. I mean, I don't know how Zoroastrianism, how that played into their culture, whether it was a matter of getting warmth from the fire or whether it was a matter of energy or strength for them. But I mean, even with regards to the Egyptians, you know, who had, you know, at the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, Shor was the idol at that time. They you know, I guess that was also part of the zodiac. They picked out a particular creature from the zodiac, and they worshipped it under a certain pharaoh or Ramses or whoever it was. They picked out a particular animal that they worship.
I'm sorry, what was the point?
The shore. The point, was that a sense of strength for them? I mean, that wasn't a conduit. You know, that was not necessarily a conduit. It was a direct form of energy that they
Sure.
claimed was responsible for their existence.
So if you could share with me in short,
I'm sorry?
what's your question?
That's what I'm trying to establish, whether or not these are forms of energy. Here on, you know, that's
All of that.
But in what way? I mean,
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to mute you because while I'm speaking, the feedback comes.
I'm sorry. For example, what about with the Zoroastrians and
Okay. So anything that is idol worship means that a person, or most often a group of people, believe that there's an energy coming from some usually physical entity. Maybe it's a holy animal who becomes that conduit. I think in origin, all of these things are going to end up in the stars. I don't have any proof for that, but I think all of them are going to end up in the stars, and somehow or another came down into the world. And some of them came down, as the Rambam says, that there was the original so-called prophet who had the belief in a particular star, and the star spoke to him, and then told him to create this particular image, and maybe that image would have been similar to an animal, so they started worshiping the animal, right? That's how it all got started. If you're talking about Zoroastrianism, I'm no expert. Their deity that they worship is Ahura Mazda, which they see as being a god who created everything and is the source of good. So that may well be who we call God. They have different philosophies and beliefs otherwise, and oftentimes you have belief systems that have an element of monotheism in it, and then you have other groups that kind of go off into idol worship. That was early Christianity. Early Christianity was not was not idolatrous. They just saw this Jewish guy as being the Messiah, and that's not idolatry. It might be crazy, but it's not idolatry. And that it was Paul who started to shift it, and even then, even then, it wasn't until Constantine and the Nicene, what was it, the Nicene Conference or whatever it's called, where they decided that Jesus was a deity and that's going to be the official Christian belief. But before that,
and started the Holy Roman Empire. There was the conclave at Trent, and then there was another one.
Well, Nicaea is the famous one.
Right. That was a big one. 300.
Nicene something. Nicene starts with a C. Nicene. Anyway, it's not important. The point is, you're going to have a mixture, right? But anybody that is worshiping anything other than God, that means that they're giving agency. They're saying that there's some other entity that is really making a choice about whether I get blessing in my life or not. Okay, whether my crops grow or not. And that's what they would worship. So who is the one in charge of seeing that I have fertility, that I'm able to have children, that my children can have children? That's going to be this goddess. And so I'm going to worship that goddess. And to make sure that my crops grow, and to make sure that I have this, and to make sure that we win the war. And thus they have their various deities. All right. But back to the mimer. I think we have an understanding of what the erroneous thought of the idolaters was. Whoop. Let's get back to our mimer. See, there we got a little bit about okay. So this led them, so since of course they believed that they could ingratiate themselves to these forces, this led their committing to an even greater error, that they thought that God abandoned the earth, relegating the authority over it, right? So God delegated to the stars and constellations, and that they alone controlled the earth's destiny. Right? So by analogy, a king appoints an officer to run a country. Now, it's true the officer's authority over the country came about because the king appointed him, right? But nevertheless, once they were appointed, it's they who govern the country, and they can make their own decisions in government. And the king does not involve himself, except on rare occasions when extreme measures are necessary. Again, this is all expressing the erroneous notion of idolatry. Both types of errors described above are included in our sage's statement that the nations of the world refer to God as the God of the gods. You notice here the lowercase g and the uppercase g. That is, they conceive of their false deities as gods, but acknowledge that God is the God of gods. For even those who believe that God abandoned the earth and relegated the authority over it to the stars and constellations refer to God as the God of the gods. They acknowledge that he is greater than those bodies and rule over them. Moreover, they realize that the very fact that, according to their misconception, the stars and constellations are deities and that they have authority, it's only coming from God, right? But nevertheless, instead, their worshipers recognize that God gave them the authority to be in charge, as in the analogy of the officer of the king who rule the country because the king is appointed, right? Conversely, even the error that the stars and the constellations are significant because the sustenance that the stars convey from the Holy One, blessed be He, comes through their choice, is included as abstractly as part of the approach of the fact that they refer to God as the God of the gods, right? So we have the true God who gives autonomy and authority to lower gods, right? So, and that lower God is making a decision about where this sustenance should go. So who should I befriend? Who should I ingratiate? Who should I worship? And who should I thank? The waiter, right? Or the one, or in this case, even more than the waiter, the one who's been given the authority by God to operate everything. So we understand this erroneous notion of idolatry. For the very fact that the intermediaries can do as they desire, convey or withhold sustenance, would imply that they have a certain measure of authority and are therefore considered gods, right? That's part of the whole idea of worshiping an entity as a god, is that they have agency, they have the ability to choose. Negating the concept, whoop, I must have missed something here. For the very fact that and are therefore considered gods. So now, negating the concept of other gods altogether comes about through realizing, so how do we negate this? By realizing that all the intermediaries are merely like an axe in the hand of the chopper, of the wood chopper, right? So basically, this whole misconception can be undone when you realize that the paradigm is wrong. These are not, no authority has been given over. They are merely an axe in the hand of the wood chopper. On this basis, it's possible to explain the nature of the wisdom of the clever person who says, I will choose the king. So we're trying to answer the question. The person who says, I will choose the king, okay, well now if you're coming from waiter mentality, right, that I have to ingratiate the waiter because that's the one who I get it from, right? So who does it make more, it takes a cleverness to realize, no, I should really make friends with the king, with the source of who this is all coming from. The fact that Jews know the truth and all the intermediaries through which sustenance descends are merely like an axe in the hand of the chopper comes as a result of their great knowledge that they perceive the inner truth. For from a surface perspective, the reason it appears that the sustenance comes as a result of the stars and constellations is that they have a positive quality which causes one to think that they are fit to serve as intermediaries. We're going to just take that for granted. Or should we read? We'll see. These are explanatory remarks in the middle of the Maamar. But anyway, so we're still on the topic of understanding what idolatry is, and basically what their big mistake is. So what their big mistake is, the Rebbe says in a word, is that they think that these entities have been given autonomy. They've been given authority, they've been given agency, and thus they worship them. Our belief is, and that's why it takes, though there was one clever guy there that realized, no, they don't have the authority, right? And even to realize that is takes a cleverness. This is so far what we're saying. We're not going to stick with this approach. We're going to move on to another approach, but that's the basic idea. All right. Any questions, comments, or insights? Well, thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And God willing, next week.
There's no, God willing. Be next Wednesday. Okay. I feel it's like this week.
Actually, it's going to be next Monday because I'm going to be busy on Tuesday, so I'm going to switch it to Monday next week.
Tuesday. Okay, fine. Me, I don't know anybody else. You want to really simplify all this? You can conceptually. There's only two things in this world: what's inside you and what's outside you. That's all there is. And even that's just in a lump of whatever, but even using the mystical and the spiritual forces and not just the jelly that's your brain, there's only two things in this world.
Мы у них снимали эту квартиру и уже просто заразились этим.
Okay, Anna's just translating it into Russian for everyone.
There's only two things in this world: what's inside you and what's outside you. In a very simple sentence, what's inside you is what your will is, and you have 100% control. What's outside you is all, you want to call it all Hashem? It's all Hashem. Hashem may show up as your wife or your child, as your fish, or the event that happens, but that's all it is. So your life is really just you and Hashem. And that whatever, that's all. Sei gesund. Have a wonderful night.
Be well. Thank you all for joining. Till next week. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.